Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Ladies Be Architects Platform Developer 1 Certification Study Group. This is Content Week 5. And I'd like to make a note that this is actually a remake or remix of our last session that was held on Thursday, August 30th, in which I was pretty sick and barely had a voice. So today I have a clearer voice, and today I promise I will not forget to review the code that I had in Dev Council to demo, which I forgot Thursday. So let's kick it off. Before I go over the objectives for week 5, I'd like to make a special announcement that tomorrow, September 6th, promptly at 8 p.m. Central Time, Charlie, who's actually the co-founder of Ladies Be Architects and is a technical architect at Deloitte Digital US, will be presenting to our study group on the topic of Heroku. So don't miss tomorrow's session, September 6th, 8 p.m. Central. Okay, now to look at some of the objectives for our week 5 content. We will be discussing Visualforce, which was introduced to us in our previous live session by Kelsey Shannon, who presented. And today, we're going to take it a step further. So we'll be discussing how it is that we display Salesforce data using Visualforce pages. What types of web content can be incorporated into Visualforce pages? How to incorporate Visualforce pages into Lightning platform applications. The benefits of Lightning Component Framework. And last but not least, describe the resources that can be contained in a Lightning component. So this is a little bit of a refresher from the introduction we had previously, but what is Visualforce and why do we use it? So Visualforce is a framework to build custom user faces. It's hosted on the Force.com platform. You can create internal and public-facing pages. For internal, you can think of custom modules, email templates, and replacement pages. When you think about public-facing pages, you would consider sites and portals. Visualforce is highly customizable even for mobile devices. And it's very powerful because it has the ability to use other web technologies. And here you can see to the right, we have an image that kind of explains how it is that Visualforce pages interact with client and the database Salesforce and application logic, and then come out and interact with web service calls, other web technologies. Please note that the slide deck is available in our Google Drive, and whenever you click on one of the links that is a source down here, it will take you to the source of where we receive the content material for this and any images that we used. So let's take a step back to week 1 of content when we were discussing some of the Salesforce platform features, and one that was discussed on our last session when Kelsey presented. It's a common theme that we frequently discuss, the Model-View-Controller. And so here, when we revisit this, the model we're thinking about or referring to storing and relating data. For view, it's displaying data and gathering input. For controller, it's pretty much the cohesiveness for it all, and it brings the business logic. Okay, on this slide, we will review what are the different data types in Visualforce. First, we have object. We can display object data by using expression syntax and components. Here, we have an additional note that's italicized. Expression syntax is used to bind components to the data set in the page controller. And here we have an example. The open curly brackets, exclamation point, object name, dot, and then we have the angle bracket, field name, closing angle bracket, and then closing curly bracket. And you'll also see here that we reference the getObject method. Next, we'll look at related data. Display related objects record by using merge field syntax. The child to parent can be up to 5 levels. The parent to child can only be 1 level. When we think of merge field syntax, think about if there was a time you ever did a mail merge in Microsoft Word. Perhaps you had your data in an Excel file, and in your columns, you had your different fields. For every row, you had a different record. And maybe you wanted to merge that into a personalized letter for donors or something. Then you would mail merge it into Word, pulling the data from the Excel file. So merge field is kind of the same thing. Here, I italicize the merge field syntax uses dot notation to retrieve data. And dot notation was also introduced to us on our live session with Kelsey Shannon. Here we have an example. The open curly bracket, exclamation point, object. Here we have the dot for dot notation and the field. Then we close the curly bracket. So down below, we have an example with an object, a custom object that I created for today's live session demo. And you'll see that for the object, I'm referencing applicant __ C. Applicant is the name of my custom object, and the __ C is identifying that it's a custom object. Here, we still have the dot notation reference. Then we have first name __ C. This is my custom field that's within my custom object called applicant. Now to review the bottom 3 data types in Visualforce. So they're included in these cells that have a background colored of light teal color, and that is because I wanted to point out that these all have a commonality. The commonality is that we use global variables. So the first one is global. Global variables will be used to retrieve general information. In this case, think of things like system information or organization information. The next one is user. So we'd use the global variables to retrieve general information, but this time it is specifically for current user. And the last one here is static. We would also use a global variable, that is the $ resource, to display static resources. And static resources was another resource that was introduced to us on our last session. Okay, so let's review Visualforce controllers. And some of this is a little redundant, but I think it's nice to have it all on one slide. You'll see down here that I reference our last study group session for week 4, presented by Kelsey Shannon, slide 31. So the new parts that you'll see to that slide is actually anything that's italicized. These are things that will add on to what we already learned and that we want to emphasize in preparation for taking the certification exam. So Visualforce controllers are required to display or update data from Visualforce. Standard controllers. Same functionality and logic as standard Salesforce pages. Standard controllers are provided for every standard and custom object. The standard controller attribute is added to the tag and assigned the name of object and can be for a standard or custom object. And it provides a mechanism to manipulate records. So when we think about manipulating records, save, edit, delete, cancel, and list are all ways we can manipulate records. Standard list controller enables you to create pages that display or act on a set of records. You can list or have a list of records to preview. You can add view filtering. You can add pagination to lists. Then they will include the next and previous links. And again, here we have custom controller, Apex class that adds, implements all of the page logic without leveraging the standard controller. The controller attribute is assigned to the custom controller. So again, here you're thinking, this is all custom code. This is Apex code. And the final bullet here is controller extension. Apex class that extends the functionality of standard or custom controllers. Okay, so this is a new slide than what we had in the live session when I was sick, but I think it helps us break down the different components and understand what we're looking at with Visualforce code. So here I have code that begins with the open angle bracket that says Apex output field and the value, and then it has equal. And then here we have the reference to the applicant custom object, which we introduced in a previous slide, dot notation, and then the reference to the custom field name that's in the custom object. So let's break this down. The teal part is actually the component name. Can be tables, forms, etc. The orange text is where we define components using an attribute. In this purple text here, here's where we talk about data binding to objects and class variables. And here we have the object. Again, the dot, which is a reference field, dot notation. And the reference field is first name _ C because it's a custom field. And together, all of the purple text is the merge field for defining the attribute. Now let's take a look at Visualforce page code. But before I dive into and break down this code that I have ready for us for demo, let's point out a few things. So Visualforce tags work like HTML or XML tags. Everything is built with tags and attributes. Tags can come in pairs, or they can be single tags. Angle brackets are what we saw with the caret pointing to the right or pointing to the left. Those are the angle brackets. You can place tags in between other tags, and you can place attributes inside tags. So let me switch over to share my screen of Dev Console, where I have some code which is on this slide for us to break down. Okay, so here I have my developer console open. I'm now looking at a Visualforce page that's named Program Application. Let's look at the code that we have here. First and foremost, we have this code on line 1. This is specifying a controller for a page using the standard controller attribute. In the open of the Visualforce page tag. So here we're opening up the page tag. Here we're stating we're using the standard controller, and then we have my object name, which is applicant, and it's a custom object, which is why we have the __ C. If you wanted to use a non-custom object, you can. You would just replace this. And for example, let's say we wanted to use account as the object. Then we would just type in account in this highlighted area. Okay, so let's jump down to line 2. Here we have apex tag for form. Forms are a way to group together input fields that relate to an object. Actions via the form will send data from all input fields to the controller. Next, we're going to talk about the page block. Elements form the foundation of the Visualforce page. Define high-level grouping, and they can have buttons at the top or the bottom of the page. The second element we have here is the page block section. These are like sections in a regular page layout. The info is displayed by default in 2 columns unless specified otherwise. And they can include a title. If you include the title can be collapsible, or should I say, the section can be collapsible. And then there's a third element that is not included in this code, but you will see often, is a page block section item. Now, we talked about this tags come in pairs, right? So here is an open tag for a page. The very final line, you'll see a closing tag for the page. And the reason why I know it's a closing tag is because here I have the forward slash right before the tag. So it actually looks like for every tag that's being used in this code, it has an associating closing tag. So I do not have an example of a single tag in the code here. Oh, wait a minute. I stand corrected. Here's one. The command button tag. You'll see that I actually have the indication of a closing that tag in the same line. So that's an example of a single tag. Okay, so let's take a look at what it is that this code looks like when you're really looking at the Visualforce and not at the code. I'm going to switch my screens now. Okay, so you'll notice that the file name in the Dev console was Program Application. It was a Visualforce page. And here you'll see your Visualforce pages will always start with the beginning of your org's URL. Then it would always be an indication of Apex. And then anything after that forward sign is going to be the name of your Visualforce file. So here we have Program Application. So this is actually the Visualforce page that we just created and saw in the Dev console. And you'll notice here that it's using one of 4 controlling appearance models. The default model for controlling appearance is detail lines. The second model, which is not shown in this example, is the main detail, which would have the lines with a white background. And the third is edit with no lines. And the fourth is inline edit, which is just like the view pages that you have, and you can double click in it and a field is then editable. So let's look at 2 other things that we have here on this page. You'll notice we have these here. These are the labels. And this button, there's one on top, one on bottom that says save. That is the command button. So 2 things I want to point out about this. Action is an action to invoke on the standard controller. In this case, save is the action. And then number 2 thing that I want to point out is that the value is actually the label. Actually, no, I'll save the styling for a little bit later. Let me switch back to our presentation. Okay. So we just did a walkthrough of this sample page. And then this is the preview of what I showed you live. Now, let's talk about data context. So we discussed previously page parameters. We use page parameters to specify records to tell the page what it is that we want to display. Page parameters are used to provide info to the server. Standard controller with no parameter will create a new potential record. Existing records are displayed by specifying their ID as a page parameter. So we're all used to record IDs. Okay. So here, data context is provided to controllers by the ID parameter of a page. Here we have the get parameters method, which is used to retrieve parameters passed to the URL and returns a map of the query string parameters in the page URL. And here I highlighted the section that's referring to this. Now, let's go over global data. We already stated that we use global variables to reference general information about either the user or organization. It uses expression syntax to be evaluated. Here, we have an example. Here is one, $user, dot notation, referencing first name field. Or here's a second example. Here we have the $organization, dot reference country. We also stated that you use the $resource and dot notation to display static resources. Now, static resources can be PNG image files. They can be JavaScript files. Static resources should be uploaded as a zip file before they can be used in a page. So the last bullet here is actually an example of using a function called the URL_for to reference the items that are contained or in the .zip static resource. So the .zip file, we stated, can have multiple files inside. So here is an example. We're using the URL_for function, referencing the global variable for resource. Here we would put the name of the resource. And then here in the single quotes, you'll see that we actually have the path for the file. So within my zip static resource file, I have a folder called images, and within that folder, there is a PNG file, it's an image file, that's the Salesforce logo. So this is an example of how we would use the URL_for function to reference static resources, which is a global resource. Okay, Now to go over data from a detail page. It allows us to leverage standard detail page for an object inside a Visualforce page. We use the Apex detail tag component to display a specific object. And here we have sample code using the same custom object that I had created for our demo session in our Visualforce page that we took a look at. One thing I want to point out here is this subject attribute, which specifies the record to display. The page layout for the specific object will dictate what fields will be displayed. And we can use attributes including or excluding associated related lists, related list hover links, and title bar. Now to talk about related lists. The related list attribute is used to show or hide related lists to a record. And here we have a snippet of sample code. You can use the component to display a list of records to the current record. Example, display a list of test scores related to an applicant record. So here again, we have my object, the custom one, applicant, and here I'm mentioning the related list of test scores, which is also custom. Let's review the different types of web content. HTML. So if you ever created a website or edited a blog of some sort, you're probably familiar with these first two columns, HTML and CSS. You can have HTML code. You can have HTML tags that are generated by the Visualforce page. You can override HTML tags that are generated by the Visualforce page. And inline CSS code can be defined for HTML tags. Next, CSS for cascading style sheets. Reference style sheets. We can use the style class attribute, which defines the style classes. The style attribute directly applies to a style. And mentioned again here, CSS files saved as a static resource. JavaScript. So we can have JavaScript code, script tags to access functions, use of the resource to access files, and JavaScript files are also saved to the static resource. And here are some of the other web contents. JavaScript base map can be interactive. Markers. You can use Apex iframe to add an inline frame or to display an external website. So we already talked about Visualforce pages. We saw a sample of Visualforce page code and what it looks like in a web browser. Now, let's take a look at what it is that we can do applying HTML and CSS to Visualforce. So here we have a part of sample code for a Visualforce page with styling. And I want to make a note that this is actually the same page that I demoed just a few minutes earlier. It's my applicant object. And here you'll notice that I named the file Program Application with Design. So it's the same program application. We just added a little bit of HTML code. Let me switch over and demo the code. Okay, switching tabs here. So now I'm on the Program Application with Design Visualforce page code. I'm in Dev Console again. And you'll notice that the very first line here and lines 23 all the way down to 38 are the exact same code that we had in the program application file that we reviewed. What is new here is that I've added some code, with the exception to this Apex form tag, some code to tell the page how it is that we want to style this Visualforce page. So here we have a background color, and this is the hex code for the background. I'm specifying the color for text, specifying the font family. Here I'm saying for heading 1, I want to use this font family and specify the font size. And here I'm just closing my tags for the styling. Now, let me switch over and show you what that looks like. Okay, so here you'll see I am now on my Visualforce page, Program Application with Design. The additional code that I just reviewed from build upon our first program application page has added some styling. You'll notice I have this darker midnight blue background. You'll also notice that my heading is applicant details, and it has a special font and font size that was applied. That is just an example, very, very minimal example of how you can incorporate HTML and CSS into your files. But there's really not many limits. I've seen some Visualforce pages that look like website pages. You would never really know that it was a Visualforce page if you didn't know what you were looking for. Now let's switch back to our presentation. This is just a snapshot of the page that we just reviewed. So now let's go over how it is that you can incorporate Visualforce pages into Lightning platform apps. You can have custom tabs, special for Visualforce pages, that can be added to your navigation menu. You can override tab home pages for either standard or custom objects. You can launch Visualforce pages with buttons and or links for, again, either standard or custom objects. You can override standard buttons, example, new button, to a Visualforce page. And page layouts. You can embed Visualforce pages in page layouts for standard or custom objects. Here are some other ways. Dashboards. You can use Visualforce as data sources for components. Custom console. Incorporate into your sales or service console custom components with Visualforce pages. And here, Salesforce mobile app menus. Again, you can use Visualforce tab for your mobile app menu. And quick actions in Salesforce mobile app. Custom actions using Visualforce adding to your mobile app and Lightning Experience action section. And last but not least, community pages. You can use Visualforce components to add to your Napili customer service community theme or template. Okay. And here's just a few screenshots. Not all of the bullets have an image here, but some of the main ones we have. You can display your Visualforce pages in Lightning from your app launcher, which is what this image is showing us. We can add it to our navigation menu. We already learned that from the previous slide. We can display Visualforce pages with standard layout. And here you can see in your builder, down here in the bottom, there's a link for Visualforce component. And you can launch from quick action when you override buttons and links. Again, Visualforce pages and dashboards. Pages must have no controller, custom controller, or reference bound to the standard set controller class. You can use custom list controllers. Here we're going to talk a bit more about the Salesforce mobile app menu and quick actions. So we already stated that we can use Visualforce pages to extend your Salesforce mobile app. You must create a new Visualforce tab for Visualforce page before adding as a menu item. You enable Visualforce page in setup for both the Salesforce mobile apps and Lightning pages. The Visualforce tab is added to the navigation menu so other mobile app users can access it. The tab should be visible to the profile or profiles that will be accessing the menu item in the mobile app. And quick actions. Create Visualforce pages. Make available for the action bar of your mobile app. You can add Visualforce custom action page layout of an object in order to enable it for a mobile app, and override predefined actions in the mobile app and Lightning Experience action sections. Service community pages. Use Visualforce pages in your communities by using the customer service template. Visualforce page component can be used from the components panel, as we see here in the image, and I've highlighted here in the bottom the Visualforce page. You can specify a record ID and height for the component. You can use Visualforce pages in Salesforce tabs and template-based communities. This next slide is also a little bit different than what we had in our original slide deck during our live session. The benefits of Lightning Component Framework. Develop dynamic and responsive applications. Event-driven architecture. Predefined components. multiple use cases, increase performance, and reduce development time. Lightning components are available on the App Exchange, and they're super helpful for cross-browser compatibility. Let's talk a little bit about the event-driven architecture. And you may have seen these before because they're actually from one of our homework assignments with the Trailhead modules. So event-driven or mission-driven. Communication is simplified by separating the event producer and the consumer. Here you can see at the top in this image, we have the event producers feeding to the event bus, then goes to the event consumer. Components can be subscribed to an application event or a component event. So here you see we have a picture, a diagram of that. Information is processed in real time. This is super beneficial. So you want to make sure that the data you're accessing is actually the most up-to-date and accurate. Components of an event-driven system. And here we have a chart that breaks down and identifies the generic events and which ones relate to platform and events. So event is a change in meaningful state in business process. Event message is a message that contains data about an event. An event producer is the publisher of an event. An event channel is the stream of events where the event producer sends the messages and the consumers read the message. And an event consumer is a subscriber to the channel. Increase performance. Uses stateful client and stateless server architecture. JavaScript on the client side to manage component data and metadata. Reduce the number of calls to a server. And the client only receives the needed data from the server. So if you've ever interacted with a website and it took forever to load a page or get the information you were looking for, chances are they were probably sending your client, your computer, and you as the end user, too much information and you only really just wanted to see a little bit. So here it's going to be efficient on the client side for the user, and it's going to be efficient on the server side. JavaScript object notation, or JSON, is used to exchange data between the client and the server. It reduces development time by having responsive components work on various devices. So responsive meaning that no matter what device you're accessing from, you can view and interact with it on the internet. Doesn't matter if you're on a desktop with a widescreen monitor or you're on a tablet or even your mobile phone. And compatibility across browsers and responsive design increases user experience. Or people on the go. We all have our device choices of preference, and it's much easier to interact with web apps when they're functional for the type of device that you're on and that you can use whichever browser it is that you want. Resources. that can be contained in a Lightning component. I'm not going to run through each and every one of them, but I just want to have a one-stop shop for you guys for the different resources that can be contained. Here we have components, application, cascading styles, controllers, design, documentation, helper, SVG, and the renderer. This is also a new addition from our live session. I realize that Visualforce could be very foreign to some of you guys, as it is for me. And I wanted to make sure that you were equipped with enough resources to go and learn a little bit more about Visualforce. Now, please don't feel like you have to go through each and every one of these resources. But if you have some extra time and you want to, you can go ahead and visit them. One of them looks like it's a little bit older, but I think it's still pretty relevant and thorough, is the Visualforce in Practice documentation that was actually composed by all of these phenomenal authors and well-known experts in our ecosystem. And to talk about next steps. So last Thursday, we went over this presentation that I am re-recording. And then tomorrow, September 6th, we will have a presentation on Heroku again by the amazing Charlie Prinsloo, who's a Ladies Be Architect co-founder, and she's also a technical architect at Deloitte Digital. Depending on how much time we have tomorrow, we may cover some testing, and we might have to move debugging over to deployment for week 7, but we'll see how things go. And I want to make a note that for those of you that were on the live study group session last Thursday when I was very sick and barely had any voice, I will also have a copy of that recording in our weekly recording folder on Google Drive. But this is the presentation that we will upload to the Ladies Be Architects, because it's a lot more clear with me having a voice and being able to walk through the content. Thank you, and I look forward to you all being on the call tomorrow evening, September 6th at 8 p.m. Have a great day.